It's good to see y'all this morning. It is not my fault about the time today. I don't know who I'm going to blame. I'll find someone to blame other than myself. You know how that, oh, Robert Wood, okay. We are in for a treat today. And I don't normally do this, but I'm compelled to do so. When I first met this giant, he was just a little thing, and started coming to church here, and we have watched this young man grow into a fine Christian man. And I told his father the other day I take full credit for that result. But I know they are proud of him, and we all are proud of him. Zach, I want to take more of your time. Appreciate you, brother.
Yes, all right.
Well, good morning. I want to thank you all for being my first class, I guess the guinea pig, so this should be interesting. Just a little forewarning before we begin. For my whole life, or so I've been told, I tend to speak at a faster pace than most. I guess the neuron comes out of my mouth the second the neuron sends the signal to the brain. I don't know. I don't understand it's happening. I don't know. So if someone just wants to hold up a yield sign or just blank stares, that'll work. So, humility. I don't know why I was given this one. Not quite sure why. So when I first was told I was doing this and I got the word humility, nothing really came to my mind at first. I guess most of these words, nothing really did, because for most of us, some of these words appear as common sense. I'm sure if we're asking ourselves right now, are we humble? Yeah, I'm humble. I like to think I'm humble. And that's where the double-edged sword of humility comes in. On one hand, if someone asks you, are you humble? Yeah, I'm humble. I like to think I'm humble. Well, you can appear as arrogant, And on the other side, if someone asks you, are you humble? Oh, I don't think I am, Well, you lack confidence. Why aren't you humble? Can you be more humble? And so humility is very broad once you get down what I've learned through this. There's many different perspectives, different ways we can approach humility from ourselves, from others. And so the more I was, preparing for this and the more I studied this, I've learned I deal with humility every day. Maybe not in the context we think of are we appearing humble to others, or people appearing humble to ourselves, in the sense of, I'm in the world of engineering, and so in the world of that, I interact with a lot of people that are too smart for their own good. And a lot of times with that intelligence comes pride, comes arrogance, and also being in the construction industry specifically, there's a lot of egos. Yeah. And I've learned these past couple months, general contractors who are mostly middle-aged men with 50 plus years of experience don't appreciate being told by a 23-year-old that their building is out of spec, out of code. I understand, I empathize, I really do. However, it's going in my report as we talk that I'm not passing it. And because I don't want my generation to be the one that levels the city of Atlanta in the next decade because we're worried about pride and arrogance. And I say all this to say, humility is very broad. We could experience it, not just us on other people, but from other people. How do we respond to it? How do we react when humility is shown or the lack thereof? Amen. And humility itself is very, very complicated. And so, to begin, and some of the questions I like to approach in this, some of the topics that will be touched, is not just what is humility, but what does humility look like? What is it? How do we know we're showing humility? Because we can show humility, or we think we are, because we think we're doing it for the right reasons, but it's not humility. So how do we differentiate when we really are showing humility or when we're not? And then there's the other side of that, how to respond to it. How do we react to humility of, someone is showing me humility, how am I aware that they are being humble? How do I react to that? How are we aware when someone's not being humble? Are we appreciative of it? Are we understanding of their motives, of their intentions? Are we understanding and appreciative of the humbleness Christ showed? He left his Father's side, his willingness to become flesh. He humbled himself, became obedient to the end, even to the death of the cross. Philippians 2:8. Are we aware and appreciative of that itself? And so to begin, in our first kind of passage here, life on empty. I really like this as a beginning one out of these 5. I really liked that we started with this one, life on empty. And admittingly, when I first started reading this, I was like halfway into the first passage, And I was like, this analogy on gas, this really isn't a great analogy for being on empty, because gas is elastic in this economy. If gas prices go up, what are we going to do? Not going to buy it? We got places to be. We're not going to ride our bicycle on 285. We got things to do. But then once you start reading, it really is a great analogy for the end of what's to come of it. So, life on empty. The analogy it shows is gas. So when we have that full tank of gas, we're not really aware of what we're doing. Oh, we have a full tank of gas. It's very hot outside. Crank up the AC. We don't know where we're going. We're going to take a nice stroll. We're not worried about how far away this is, that is. We don't have to worry about filling up the next morning because we have a full tank of gas. But what if we don't? We become very aware, very observant of just what we're doing. We're not going to have the AC on. We're going to have the window down. We're going to count every single mile. We do the quickest math we've ever done in our life. Well, if I have 18 miles left, I live 30 miles away. How can I get there in time? And so the same kind of works with even anything, even money. When we get that first paycheck, we feel like on top of the world. I can do anything. I can go to the store. Oh yeah, I like to get a piece of that chicken. How much you want? I'll take it all. I don't care. I have all the money in the world. But on the flip side of that, when we have nothing, when we're on empty, when we're days before that next paycheck, we become very aware, we're observant, we become very aware of what we're spending, what we need to do, what bills we have to pay. Hey, I can't do this, I need to wait until I get paid. And so, before I get into the next, I want to actually turn to the passage that this is on, Philippians 2, 3 to 11. And one thing I found interesting about this passage in general, Philippians 2, is, of course, this is one of Paul's letters. Now, why are Paul's letters so important? I like to think of this passage itself, Life on Empty, as more of perspective of humility. And this is really interesting because not only is it one of Paul's letters, but we all know that when Paul writes, perspective is very important. Background is key to why he is writing. What are the concerns he has for this church that he is writing? And so for this passage, I'm sure we all know, be of one mind, be of one accord. And why is this so important? Well, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to start, preferably in verse 3. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. So what does this talk about? Before I go into this, does anyone have the American Standard Version in here? Anyone have an ASV? No. So, in 3, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory. This is one of those things where translations become key because not only does it provide, obviously, a easier translation, but a different perspective on how you view things. So through all these verses, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory. What are we talking about here? Well, our selfish ambitions. What are we, especially when the perspective of writing to churches here, being of one mind and one accord is very important. Humility comes into play with this because one of the most important things in this church is unity and harmony. Paul emphasizes throughout this chapter here unity and harmony in the church. Why? Well, it goes back to verse 3. Our selfish ambitions, they cause divisions. When we start to put ourselves, our pride, our own benefits above everyone else's, above the church's, that's when division gets caused. Because we're not worried about serving others. We're not worried about serving God. We're worried about serving ourselves, serving our own benefits. And when that gets in the way, we fall away from our main purpose of the church. Amen. So looking down in this verse, we'll move down to verse 7. I want to make note of, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Now again, I'm referring to the American Standard Version here, but made himself of no reputation. Now when you think of reputation, we think of, well, someone's pride, the experience they've built up, their, I don't want to say arrogance, but their experience that they have. The American Standard, we read here, but made himself or emptied himself. So Christ literally in here emptied himself and took upon him the form of a servant. Sometimes we don't really appreciate what we have until it's gone. When we're empty, when we have nothing, when we look look at the high points of life, we're like, man, I wish I was there right now. Sometimes it unfortunately does take us to be in the lowest points of life to realize what we have and what we could be doing. And that from that point, what do we say at that point? We hit rock bottom. The only way to go is up. Now,
and we also need to be thankful for what we do have, even when things don't seem good and things fall upon you in a bad way. You need to be thankful for that experience, just as much as you're thankful for when things are going good in your life. You know?
yeah, and we've heard all the time, well, we typically hear some of the bad things of prayer. Oh, we only pray to God when we're in need of something.
Right.
Well, like this finally happened. We're happy this happened, so now we're going to thank God. But we're not going to thank Him when, bad things happen and He's there with us. Trusting in God's sovereignty, it doesn't keep us from struggling. We know this. Right. And so this brings me to my next point of another verse while we're here in Philippians. The one thing that jumped out at me while reading this is another verse in Philippians 4:13. I'm sure we can all know it. Anyone, Philippians 4:13, top of their head? I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. Now, I'm probably going to get a lot of feedback, maybe even criticism for this, but I feel like Philippians 4:13 is probably, I don't want to say misinterpreted, but one of the most misused meanings of any verse I've ever heard of. And bear with me, I'll explain. So, we see scripture, we see the verses from the Bible all the times in our life. We can see it in public. You see like athletes use it as tattoos sometimes. You see it on like branding for clothing. You see it on bumper stickers all the time. And one of the most commonly ones I've seen is Philippians 4:13. And why is that? Well, a lot of people use this verse for motivation, obviously. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And typically a lot of athletes use it. And I'm not saying any of that's wrong. I get it, but I feel like the meaning they're using the term is more of for personal benefit rather than the encouragement and the promise that the verse truly gives. For example, I'm playing football. I have a huge football game tomorrow, and it's finally here. It happens. We're at halftime. We're getting blown out. We go into the locker room. Hey, God is with me. If I can do this through Christ, we're going to come back and win. I know of it. Is that going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. Another one. Well, I have a huge exam tomorrow. I haven't studied one bit at all. But you know what? I can do this through Christ. Christ is with me, so I'm going to ace that. Are you? Probably not. There's a tree in my yard enough. Christ is with me. I'm going to go lift this tree up. I appreciate the confidence, but probably not. And so, whatever we do in life, whether it's in our careers, whether we're furthering our careers, whether we're starting a family, whether we want to be a better family, a better husband, better wife, whatever we do, we're doing it through Christ. Or that's what we should be doing it through, because it's comforting to know Christ is with us when we're doing this, which is why the second part of this verse is so important. Hence, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens or strengtheneth me. Whether we're successful, whether we fail, we're doing it through Christ. So when we hit that rock bottom, we're at the bottom, I failed. You know what? Christ is with me. The only way to go is up. And so Christ is there with me. And that should strengthen me. That should comfort me. And so thank you, Terry, as you were saying, we should be thankful. Because there are times in our life where we don't know what we have until it's gone. But at the times, we're not alone. Whether we have people here or whether we know in the promise and the encouragement that this verse makes, hey, Christ is with us, we'll get through this. It may be tough, as I said. We're not promised that our life is not going to have struggle, because it is.
One version, I forgot what it was, some years ago. I can endure all things through Christ. So it's not so much what I accomplish, but what I can deal with, what I can absorb, accept in my life, because He's with me to help.
What we're going through.
That's right.
And so I like this verse as more of a reminder rather than, hey, this is motivation in life.
And also just to point out, Paul was in prison when he was writing this. And to me, that makes it even more encouraging. Because he's not writing these encouraging words from a place of luxury or comfort.
You're getting ahead of me. Thank you. Because I was getting off on a tangent, and I like that because now I'm back where I was. So thank you. But yes, another perspective of this is also Paul's writings to the church, but also Paul's in prison here. And as we see in here, not only is Paul in prison, but like he's awaiting in verse 9, whereas God also, not verse 9, sorry. I forgot where it was. But to summarize, Paul is awaiting basically what he thinks is his execution. He doesn't know when his last day is. But he knows he may, in this situation, lose his life for Christ. Now, it's very dramatic to what are the things we go through. But in here, he's welcoming death for Jesus. And even here, he's concerned to continue his apostolate for Christ because he knows death may be way, but he endures and he continues because he knows Christ is with him.
That's right. Because when I was going through, when I first started my sobriety, I struggled really bad. And there's times that when I actually would have to talk to God, Christ, talk to God, to help me to get through what I was going through. And this verse, it does, as it says, through Christ you can be strengthened. But you got to believe that it's going to happen. And you do need to turn to Him during this time. I couldn't have done this. Yes, I put a lot of work into this. I've had a lot of support. But I gave it to Him to start with because I was done with it. And I couldn't have done it without Him. And He does strengthen me in it. I'm struggling now. But I know I keep turning to Him. I can make this and I can stay where I've been these past 9 years to continue forward. But you got to be strong in this. In anything you struggle with, you've got to be strong and you have to know that He's there to help strengthen you.
Yeah, he's there, and he also, not only here, he shows us an example. He proves to us that this is possible.
Yeah.
In verse 9, where God also hath highly exalted him and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth. Christ is worthy of all. He's worthy of all praise and honor. He's the ultimate authority, yet he still humbled himself, became a man, became flesh, and showed us it is possible. Jesus was tempted. He experienced the same things we do, but still showed us we can endure all things. He's there. He knows what we've gone through, and that should strengthen us, that we're not in this alone, that we have someone else to help us in this fight.
Amen.
Another thing I want to make note, I don't want to stay on this one forever. Time is running fast today. But sometimes when we're on empty, it proves to us that sometimes we don't know what we're truly capable of until we're in that situation. We become very hasty, hesitant, aware of things. But also, the good or bad, we say things all the time, I'd never do that, I'd never be in that. Well, you don't know until you're in that situation. We're showed here in John 20. Thomas didn't believe. Thomas doubted. And but until I doubt that Thomas would ever be in that, thought he would ever be in that situation until he was, Christ is actually here and now I'm believing. We have in Luke 22, Peter's denial. Peter, I would never deny you, Lord. Even after being told he would, he still denied Christ. Peter never thought he would, but he was put in a situation where he had to deny Christ. Even in that same passage before it in Luke 22, Judas betrayed Jesus. Christ knew Judas was going to betray him. Judas betraying Christ for monetary means, he probably never thought that would happen. Yet he was put in a situation where our own selfish ambitions get put forth above serving, above the benefit of desired outcome, and we do things we don't necessarily think we would do when we're at certain points in our life, whether we're on empty, whether we're at the highest point we could ever be at in our lives. So moving on, I could talk about this one forever, but we have time at our essence. Of course.
Chapter 4, verse 7 tells us, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your heart and your mind through Jesus Christ." I think all the things we just got to talking about, that brings that even more stronger. We're understanding that peace that we do have as Christians is that if Christ is in the center of our life and we're going that way, no matter what comes our way, we can take it. We can have it. We just need to do it.
And think about Paul when he was writing this, and how humble he had to have been.
Right.
Christ told Ananias, I will make him suffer greatly for my name's sake. And Patrick even went as far this morning in his sermon in Job 2:1. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You have to put your trust and humble yourself before the Lord, and no matter what you do. And I thought it was very interesting that Paul was suffering greatly and wrote another great epistle to the church.
Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up.
Right.
We've all been in those places. And even in the context of this, we say all the time, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Why? Because we've been there. We know what it feels like to have nothing, to be at the points of, man, this is terrible. We want to know from experience, someone there with us, what it's like to be in this situation, which is why it's important that we keep the peace of God and we keep our mind like Christ, because Christ has been there. So we know if we follow Christ that we can get through this because he showed us there is a way to get through this. He's done it himself. And so moving on to the next passage, and the second one, we have passions in the pursuit of grace. So the last one is more about the perspective. And this one I like to think of as more as the motives in terms of humility. Your intention. What are your intentions when you're trying to, whether it's do a good deed, a good act, or when you're just trying to help someone out, or in any situation that entails humility? What is your motives? Are we doing things for the right reasons, as we talked about earlier? We may be thinking that, yeah, I'm trying to be humble in this situation. I'm doing it for the right reasons, but maybe from an outside, someone looking in, it may not appear as humble. So reading in this passage we have more towards the bottom of the first passage, however, unbridled passions more often than cannot lead us into dangerous waters at the expense of our spiritual well-being. Unbridled passions. What is unbridled? Out of control. Things we don't want to do. We can't control them. It goes back to selfish ambitions. Why do we do the things that we do? I'm sure there's a lot of children here. I'm sure a lot of parents can relate to this. But when your child does something wrong and you confront them, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? What's the first response they give? I don't know. Well, if you don't know, then why did you do it if you don't know? There has to be some reason, an intent why we do things. Whether it's a good intention or a bad intention, there's reasons why we do things. And so the scripture here is James 4, if you want to go into it over to James 4, 1 through 10. So in this context, this passage is more about drawing nearer to God. And how are we doing that? Through our actions, through our motives, through humility. So starting in verse 3, ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. So why do we not receive things?
Ask for the wrong reason.
We ask for the wrong reasons. We ask for absurd things. Sometimes if we ask wrongly, we get frustrated. Why is, I pray to God over this. I wanted this thing to happen. It didn't happen. And of course, the desired outcome is not only going to be always going to be there. It's going to be what God wants us to either learn from that experience or have that experience from it. And so it's more as we're asking for something, whether it be ridiculous or whether it be something we truly want and we don't get it, but it's as if we're expecting an outcome from God when we pray for things. Like, oh, I want this thing to happen, so I expect it to happen. Why is this not happening? I'm assuming that God will provide me with everything I want if all I have to do is ask him. Well, are we taking a step back and realizing, why are we asking for this? What is our intentions our motives. Are we trying to wanting this thing for personal gain? Or are we doing this to benefit, whether it's to serve others, whether it's to benefit our walk and our faith, or whether it's just something positive rather than not for personal gain or selfish ambitions? So in verse 8, skipping down all to verse 8, draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. It is very important, and I learned growing up, I know my dad's talked about this a lot, but who we associate with is very important.
Yes.
Whether it's in the church, whether it's outside the church. Why do we congregate here? Yes, we worship with one another. We're drawing near to one another, but when we draw near to those of like minds, we're not only uplifting each other, but we're drawing ourselves closer to God as well, because we're with people of like minds. And so one very important passage, one of the important things here in this context of James is our associations. Are we with those of like minds so we can have the mind of Christ? In verse 6, but he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. Now here's where we draw in humility. So we all know God doesn't like proud. He doesn't like zealous things, more so of, again, you can be prideful of things, but what is your intentions? Are you doing it because, oh, this is for my personal gain, I want to look good in front of everybody, this is the best thing I've ever done? Or is it because, in terms of servitude, in terms of you want to appear humble, but you want to appear you want to use the grace that God gave you for the kindness of others. You want to use it to help others, not more so as yourself. And so drawing back to verse 8, draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. He tells us right here what we have to do. Some of these verses aren't very complicated. We just have to read and hear what he expects from us. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw near to you. If we draw near God, God will meet us. But we have to seek him. We have to walk with God, not walk in front of him, not expecting things by walking ahead of him. Hey, I assume I know what God wants from me, so I don't need to walk on him. I can just do my own thing. We need to walk alongside God, be with him on that journey as he is with us. If we seek him, he will meet us. He will be with us. And that is comforting to know, so we don't put ourselves in front of God. As we know, when we put pride typically is to us putting ourselves above other people. And so,
we're sitting here talking about this segment of thoughts. And one individual in the Bible comes to my mind, and that's Solomon. God said, to lead my people, I'll give you what you need. What would you like? He could have chosen anything, but he asked for wisdom to lead a nation of Israel. To me, his mindset wasn't on what's better for me, but it's what's better for us. And I think that's the point we're talking about right now, is those things that we need to think about what's better for us. But through that engagement of what God asked him, look what he received. He received a lot of wealth. He had a lot of blessings in his life, but because he asked for that thing that was most needed and not the things that he needed.
and that's a good point. That kind of leads us into the next passage of our intentions. But why are we doing things? Is it for ourselves? Is it for other people? And sometimes, like Solomon, when we ask for things and it's not for ourselves, sometimes we sacrifice things for the sake of others. Like he could have asked for anything in the world, but he wanted wisdom so he could lead his people. How much are we willing to sacrifice? How much are we willing to give to God to not only humble ourselves, but to get what God expects from us? And so this next passage, titled Let's Take a Walk, and in the context, most of the time we hear walk in the Bible, most of the time we hear walk in terms of a journey. Not necessarily you're walking, but walking in our journey of faith. Here on this earth, we have a desired outcome of let's take a walk. And for most of this passage, in terms of humility, I see this more of, I guess, in terms of ignorance. And this is where the part of humility comes in, that we don't realize we're not showing humility when we think we are. Because sometimes ignorance comes in when we're trying to please God when we're praying. You know, why are we praying for what we're praying? But when we're praying, sometimes we need to take a step back and reflect on why we're praying. Are we doing it? Are we assuming what we want from God? Are we trying to impress God? Why are we doing things? Are we trying to please God to impress Him? Or are we trying to please God to serve Him? And so one of the biggest examples we have of appeasing God is obviously Cain and Abel through sacrifice. How much are we willing to sacrifice to appease God? And without going into the whole, wow, time is at essence. Okay, so without going into the whole story of Cain and Abel, one of the main things I grab from Cain and Abel is our actions matter when we're doing things, because not only does it show humility, but our attitude of those actions also matter as well. Because why are we doing things? And sometimes we do things with good intent, like, hey, obviously today we're not going to sacrifice, as it says here, I think, sacrificing our firstborn, sacrificing ridiculous things. We don't do that. But in terms of today, sometimes we sacrifice our time, you know. Sometimes we sacrifice relationships. We sacrifice things we want to be doing in our spare time rather than putting forth our time to God. And it's hard. Sacrifice is hard. But how much of that are we willing to sacrifice in order to do what God expects from us? How much are we willing to sacrifice to meet God's expectations of us? And here, that's where we get into walking with God. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to walk with God. We don't want to get in front of Him. We don't want to rush in front and feel like we don't need Him anymore. And one of the biggest examples of this I've experienced is when you try to talk with people who, especially in my field, you try to explain things to people, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this. You try to explain things to someone, and hey, this is how you do this, but they try and interrupt you. Oh, you like this and this? It's like, yes, but sometimes if they're wrong or not, but they try and jump in front of you because they think they know what they're talking about. They think they know more than what they should. Now, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what your intentions are. Are you trying to, make yourself look good? Or I know this. I already know this. I don't need this explained to me. Just like as we're praying to God. Oh, I already know all this. These things happen for a reason. But then you end up jumping ahead. And that's why one of the most important things I've learned through my life is hearing is just as, if not more important than talking. Hearing gives you that sense of understanding that we need sometimes. And there's actually quite a lot of verses in here about hearing. So if we will turn, this verse is Micah 6:6-8, if you want to go ahead and turn there. What does God want in return? What does He expect from us? The background here in Micah, I really like this passage. Micah, it's more of his proclamation to God here, because he's trying to save the people. He's trying to save Israel. He knows the people of Judah, where their hearts lie. He knows that all their sins hide behind all these religious observations, these religious events that they throw, all these idols and all this, not necessarily idols, but all these observations they have. They think they're doing this, but He knows where their hearts lie. He knows they're not doing this for the right intention. So Micah is making this proclamation to God concerning the people to keep Judah from judgment. And so he gives this response here in verse 8. He has showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Because they're assuming they know what they want from God, but as Micah shows here, you just have to look. God, all you have to do now is to love mercy, do justly, walk humbly with God. But now that provide you salvation? No. But He's saying these things will lead you toward that. A lot of these words, like humility, there's a lot of things that come with it, such as kindness, such as willingness to put others before yourselves that can help you along the way with humility. And again, we hear in verse 7, will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Now, obviously, he's asking a rhetorical question here, but he's asking them, how much are you willing to sacrifice? You're giving all these things, but what is that showing? Are you really trying to do this to please God? Are you just doing it just to show, hey, I'm trying to be selfless here. I'm trying to show my humility by providing these things to God. And so when God has already shown us what he wants from us, sometimes we need to take a step back and realize we don't need to ask sometimes, because we ask for things sometimes, as Tommy was saying earlier, like we know what the outcome is. We know these ridiculous things we're asking for. We're just trying to do so in order for our personal gain. Man. So in the next passage of comparison, yeah. So in the fourth passage, we have comparison. Should we even bother? In terms of humility, I see this obviously as comparison. And this is one of the things, it's very controversial, especially in Christianity, because I know it's been brought up a lot. We typically like to compare ourselves to others. And it's hard to, because sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it. And here it makes really exaggerated things such as, oh, I have a bigger Bible. That's crazy. And sometimes we think these things are really crazy, but if you take a step back, humanity is really surprising sometimes. Some of these things really do happen, and we think it's the most ridiculous things, but it happens. So why are we secretly compare ourselves to others? And what does this lead to? It leads to envy. It leads to jealousy. It leads to pride. It leads to all the things as the antithesis of Christ. Humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord. Don't let all these silly comparisons get in the way that leads to other things, which is going to further lead us astray in our walk. And even here, throughout all these passages, Jesus has given us an example. We have the focus on the standard that Jesus set. And in here, we're brought to Luke 22, which we talked a little about earlier. Luke 22, we have in Luke 22, we have the Lord's Supper. We also have Peter's denial. We have Judas's betrayal. But here is a good context that Christ gives us, for example, of following the standard he set, not sitting back and being served, but stepping forward and serving others. So, verse 24 through 27, I want to first start in 27. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat or he that serveth? Is he not that sitteth at meat, but I am among you as he that serveth? Christ is the ultimate authority. Yet here, he's among them as the servant. He humbled himself to be that servant, to serve others, to show us, hey, sometimes it is hard when people's pride gets in the way, when we want to react other ways than we should. But Christ is showing us here, even those that are not deserving of it, he's still showing his servitude. He knew that Peter was going to deny him. He knew that Judas was going to betray him, yet he was still there having the supper with them, washing their feet, being a servant unto them, as he showed us we should do unto others. And this is not just important as for ourselves, but it's important when we show humility to others, when we show our influence, because we can greatly influence, not just in here, like I'm up here teaching, but even outside in the world. How do our actions influence others when we're not even realizing it? When we serve others, it can greatly influence other people, not just in leadership roles, as kind of Jesus is providing a leadership role here, but not just in leadership roles, because we use our lives to influence others and not to benefit ourselves. And that is the standard of Christ. The antithesis of Christ is to be a servant unto others.
Amen.
To use our lives for others, not just for ourselves. Because in the end, we all want to get to the same place. We all want to draw near to one another. So why are we putting our personal gains, our personal preferences above others, when what does that get you? It doesn't get us anywhere.
Right.
In verse 26, but ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that does serve. The greatest among you is the servant among you.
Amen.
And that's showing the response of humility when we're looking at other people, hey, you know, that person's very humble because they're over there helping someone that no one else would. And sometimes when we're doing things to help other people, are we doing it? We're like, hey, maybe someone else will see me helping this person and I'll get recognized for that. It all goes back to perspective. Why are we looking at the things we are looking at?
Some people do it because they're just self-serving. It's about them. They want to be in what they're doing, you know? And good intentions, but the reasons behind them are not, it's all about me. See what I did? You know, see how I went out and helped this person? Because they're not doing it in the sight of God that way. They're doing it because I want to be seen doing it.
Yeah, and those are the people that we know that we know they're going to disappoint us every time. We know they're going to betray us, yet they still act just the same way we expect them to. Wow.
I've always tried to take people at their face value to see first impression, how they act, how they're going to do. You know, can tell you a lot about a person. And you talk about hearing. If you just sit back and listen and not really talk, you can pick up things and learn things.
It is, and one of the things.
And decipher what's going on.
It is. And to wrap things up, one of the biggest things I've had to come to terms with myself is, even though we're not alone, sometimes it's hard to ask for help. One thing I've had to learn is it's okay to not know everything.
Right.
It's okay to ask for help sometimes. I know sometimes we have to be independent people. I can do this for myself. I want to try to do it by myself. And sometimes we need help. And sometimes it's hard to ask for that help. But we're not alone. In asking for that help, it does take humility. It does take to not let pride get away, to take a step back and ask for help. Because sometimes you need to be the bigger person and say, hey, this is not going how I expected to. Let me take a step back. Let me ask for help. Let me get a different train of thought. Because not only are we're not expected to know everything, whether it's we're trying to learn the Bible, whether it's trying to learn everything in life, and it's okay. If we want to follow and pursue something, we're not going to know everything about it. And sometimes we feel as we're expected to, and so we get aggravated, we get frustrated when we don't know these things. But that's the part of, that's where it comes about service. It's not about good work, but it's about helping for everyone to work towards a common goal. It's to end up at the same place with one another as we all are trying to. So let's get the help we need. So not only can I help myself, but I can help others. Sometimes if you ask for help, you can learn things from other people as well. Not just from not knowing it, from hiding it and be like, oh, I don't want to ask for help because I think I got this. And so to wrap this up, I want to read quickly. In John 13, in 1 through 7, specifically in verse 7, then Jesus said, that's not John 13. John 13, 7. Jesus answered and said unto them, what I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. 17. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. And back in verse 15, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done unto you. You're not going to do things perfectly. We're not perfect. But again, we should walk with God. We should do what as God expects us. And we should be happy if we're doing things for the right reasons. If we do them as God expects us to, we're not going to always succeed. We're not always going to fail. But if we walk with God and we do things for the right reasons, if we do things with the intentions that not benefiting ourselves for personal gain, but for serving others, if you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. That was like half of the lesson. I did not expect that to happen.
Feel your pain.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a great class.
Thank you.
He called all